Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Portsmouth School Board meeting, work session, I should say, for January 20th and public hearing. So the agenda for this evening is we will do the Pledge of Allegiance, as we do at the beginning of every meeting, and then we'll open up the public hearing first off. The rules seem to be historically, anybody who wishes to get up to speak may walk up to the microphone. You can speak for as long as you'd like, although at 8 o'clock, or 9 o'clock, if we're still doing this, maybe we'll start cutting it short. And we'll give people 2 or 3 chances, usually it's 3 rounds, to come up and say what they feel that they need to say. If they've had thoughts after the fact, you'll have another chance to come back. And then we're going to actually have a work session looking at the central office reorganization. So if you'll... if I just ask the superintendent to take the roll call, then we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance.
Ann Mayer.
Here.
Carol Chelman. Kent LePage.
Here.
Dexter Legg.
Here.
Rebecca Remison. Ann Walker.
Here.
Mitch Schulman.
Here.
Tom Martin. Leslie Stevens.
Here.
Clay Haywood. Linda Brulette.
Here.
Savannah Federo.
If you're wondering about the mics, I guess there's some other meetings going on. There's a city council meeting, I believe, for the CIP this evening, which is the reason we're here and we couldn't get into city chambers. And there are not enough microphones to go around, so we actually ended up, I believe, just having to rent some extra mics for tonight. Nobody's going to get up and sing. So if you take a minute with your own thoughts and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance, then we'll start up. So I'll open up the floor for the public hearing. If you would like to speak, just walk up to the microphone and say your piece. State your name and address, please.
Patrick Ellis, 235 McKinley Road. There's obviously a lot of additional work that needs to be done before your budget that you're preparing is going to be finalized. Having attended the work session on Tuesday night and hearing some of the discussion and the proposed cuts that are being made now in order to meet the City Council's desire for a 0% increase to the school budget. I guess there were a few things that struck me as concerns. I remember when Ed Stokel retired as the technology director from this school district that the Portsmouth school system suffered for not having a clear direction of where to go with technology. It was several years. I think the reason his position was not filled, my recollection, is that it had to do with the state funding formula and the city of Portsmouth having to give back $1 million+ back to the state after the budget had been finalized. But the ramifications of not having that position filled for several years had a long-lasting impact. Some of the computers, from what I understand, I don't want to state this as fact, but my understanding, some of the computers in this building were computers that Ed Stokel picked out prior to his retirement 7 or 8 years ago. The fact that multiple technologies for smartboards were introduced into the elementary classrooms is likely because there wasn't a central person providing guidance to the elementary schools that we're going to pick Promethean or we're going to pick smartboards and we're going to go in this direction. And the reality is that the work that a teacher would do on a Promethean board was not necessarily easily ported over to someone who had a smartboard. The fact that the technology director is being cut when we live in a global society where technology is all around us. The idea that we are going to rely upon not a centralized person to take a look at technology and to guide us forward, particularly when we're about to essentially build out all this new technology in the new middle school. I'm pretty concerned about that. I'm certainly happy that in the proposed budget that we didn't see drastic cuts to the educational core, that classroom sizes are being roughly maintained. I am somewhat concerned that English language arts class sizes are clearly going to have to go up. I think it's in the 7th and 8th grade. I don't think it's the 6th, but just the 7th and 8th. I do recognize that part of the intent of the longer class day that's being proposed for the middle school is to provide additional instruction time to hopefully make up for that. But I also recognize that there's a $300,000 or $400,000 additional deficit that needs to be made up. I'll certainly speak to the City Council that I believe that excellence in education is something that every community should stand for, that if the budget that you bring forward can't quite hit 0% to maintain excellence in education, that the city should recognize that the school board and the schools have done their part to try to rein in spending where they can, but that we should support a budget that you propose. At the end of the day, although this is the greatest recession that any of us have lived through, the Seacoast has done remarkably well. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the reality is that the greater Portsmouth area has I think, the 10th lowest unemployment in the country. So although we hear a lot about unemployment, I think perhaps the City Council should focus, instead of debilitating certain programs, which is what I fear happens with additional cuts, if the teachers don't if those 22 teachers don't potentially go for the early retirement. The cuts that would ensue from the additional $300,000 or $400,000, what will that really amount to in our taxes? A small increase, not a dramatic increase, an increase that I think the vast majority of the taxpayers, certainly there'll be a vocal minority who will say that 1 penny more is going to force them to move out of town. But I also know that there are people who have moved out of town because of what's happened to our schools. Some folks, one neighborhood over from us that we know very well, who spoke here last year and said they were quite scared of the impact that these cuts are going to have on the educational program, and they were seriously considered leaving town. They bought a house in Greenland. They're leaving. So I do hope that you'll move cautiously as you consider what other cuts may need to be made to achieve a 0% budget. And I guess I would ask, in terms of technology, knowing how integral it is in our students' lives and our lives, that we don't lose our way there, and we make certain that we have a plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Don't be shy.
Hi, I'm Emmy Adams, 6 Nixon Park. I back everything that Pat said, so I won't repeat it. I do think technology is really important, but the other piece that I noticed in the paper was the automotive trades program at the high school. And as a business owner in the construction field, I just want to stress the importance of the trades for a large percentage of the population of kids, students, that aren't on the normal academic collegiate track. And I just want you to be mindful of the importance of those type of programs in our city, because the trades are not going to go away, and in the school system. Thank you.
My name is Rob Piedden. I live 130 FW Hartford Drive in Woodlands. Just speaking off the cuff, and I really haven't had a chance to digest all these numbers, but just being a part of this process for over a year and attending the school board meeting from last year, and then the ensuing city council meetings where we were wrestling through the budget, just a couple of thoughts come to mind is that there was I feel like the school board maybe lost some of the political battle here in the town. There was a highly organized effort to save the Portsmouth pool nearby, which I understand there are a lot of people that feel strongly about that, but from my opinion, there's not $1 spent on there is worth more than the dollar spent on an extra teacher or an extra piece of technology for our kids. And I recognize some of the same people here tonight that were at the city council meetings that actually stood in line to speak on behalf of the proposed budget, the 2.9%, which wasn't fully, we didn't fully get, as I understand. I think you as the school board need to put some thought into the political side of this. And this year we have a 0% budget request, which in my mind is going to take away from our kids. And to echo the point of the earlier gentleman, I believe that there is going to be not necessarily an exodus, but a reputation that Portsmouth doesn't consider education a priority as maybe perhaps it once did. And for example, things like you're mobilizing more political support like we did with WAVE, but doing it in a way that also being mindful that you need to compete with those dollars for other departments, be it police or fire or the pool or whomever, that we need to not just to justify why it's important to have education, but why dollars for education are more important than those other city functions. And I don't think that case was articulated in a unified way from the people here in town and the school board to really be a part of that overall message. And yeah, it's going to have to be, we're all fighting for dollars here, and nobody wants to raise taxes. And the other part of this is being able to justify to other voices in this process, like the taxpayers, Association, who feel like there's too much waste and bloat in the school budget right now. And I personally am not smart enough to know why that is or what that is, but for example, maybe inviting someone like him to be a part of the process of the budgeting process so he can understand what goes into that, or organizations like his can understand what goes into your budget and give voice to the fact that there isn't as much waste as perhaps they're thinking, and give more political heft to a higher budget for this year, because I know that there's going to be some tough choices that need to be made. And I know there are issues that are systemic, like health care benefits, retirement issues that can't be helped sitting in your shoes. So I think we're all agreed that we want education to be a priority. That's why we're all here tonight. I wonder if maybe we should approach it from a different, kind of a different point of view, that there's a political battle upcoming, and I personally would like to see, for the upcoming budget battle, more presence of the school board and justification behind the numbers to be made on a political basis to the city at large. Thank you.
Good evening, John Bouchard, 150 FW Hartford Drive. First of all, thank you for all the work that you do for our children and for the city. I know it's a lot of hours you put in, days, weeks, and preparing for a budget season. A couple things I ask you to look at is to be very careful with a 0% increase on your budget. Even though we've been through tough times, we've gone through, year after year cuts, we can't make that up. And because we were in a recession and different things happen, the children that are in school do not get to repeat the year of school because we made cuts, and now the money's going to come back through in years to come. They do not get to make that up. And we need to remember that as a city. We need to move forward, and the education needs to move forward, because these children will not get another chance. I also ask you to really look at the technology. I'm in the technology industry. I've been in it for 23 years. In this city, we're really far behind, especially in the elementary schools. It's really a disappointment of what we can offer these children. As we all know, the technology that is out there today, it's not just turning on a computer and learning to do a keyboard. There's a lot of different technologies that we need to teach our children before they get into the workforce or go off to college. So I ask you to take a close look at the budget. We all know that if we present zero, we're going to come back with more cuts. It's going to be even more detrimental to the city. We just need to be really careful of what we have. And I think we need to stand our ground. Sometimes we have to stand up there and say, we can't cut anymore because it's going to hurt the city and it's also going to hurt the children of this city. So I ask you to really take a close look at some of those things. But I also want to thank you for all the time and effort that you put in.
Mark Brighton, 285 Union Street. I would like to point out to, well, the people in back of me, and I know the school board is aware of it, but it has been years since there's been an actual cut to the school budget. So please, terminology is, words mean things. So when we're talking about cuts, let's be careful. We're still $400,000 away from a flat budget. So far, you're talking about reducing 7.5 full-time equivalents, and that is without any teacher cuts. I know that superintendent wants to protect his core teaching material. That I understand completely. I think there was, you folks, your board members had some good questions for him last Tuesday. I think that board member Shulman had an excellent one. You need to clearly define what your core material is. For those present, just a quick read of the high school. Architecture, robotics, electronics, natural disasters is an elective, botany, zoology, planetary astronomy. Fortunately, the assistant superintendent last year dragged me around to various, he was nice enough to take me around to various classes. And I'd be more critical of the computers, but he was very sneaky about it. He actually had the children show me why the computers and the whiteboards are valuable. So I'm going to leave that alone, lest I, you know, he did a good job with it. He was sneaky, and I really applaud him for it. Early education, parents and families today. I think that used to be called health, but then I noticed that there are some other classes that come under that. In English, conscience and the law, literature and music, film studies. There's something called service learning, which apparently is volunteering. You get credit for going out into the community and volunteering. History of sports. I think that my point is that you need to clearly define what a core teaching material is. In the old days, it was the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic. Public school education was designed to get the masses, and I repeat, the masses, so that they could have some idea of what was happening in their governments. I know, and I'm not even suggesting that subjects like French, music, German are not essential, or they should not be taught. Obviously, those subjects need to be taught. Computer, science, that isn't even part of the 3 R's. That needs to be taught. But again, if you people don't clearly define this, then I'll be frank, people like me are going to run wild on you in the public meetings and ask you why not. I think it's a legitimate question that the Association of Portsmouth Taxpayers will have. What is core? And then there is this history course, another point of view. Apparently it is about a history, and it's a quarter, I gather it's a quarter credit, quarter of the year. It's a history of the oppressed. If you would please at least put in the Portsmouth Taxpayers, I would support that course. Now, I would like to refer you folks to, and I am sure that some of you are painfully aware of it anyway, but it is teacher contract, Article 31.1, reduction in workforce. The elementary schools, the number of the student-to-teacher ratio is 23-to-1, and in the secondary it's 27-to-1. I recognize that there's some complexity involved in weighting students with various needs, but I suspect we are a long way from those. And if this contract was negotiated in good faith which I assume it was, that tells me that the teachers themselves believe they can teach to the core material at these ratios. So let's take a good look at this. What is your core? How many teachers do we need? There are people, there is no one. My wife and I are about as middle in the middle class as you get in this town. We are under great stress to be able to stay here. The school budget is a tremendous part of this. I support education. I think it's great if the assistant superintendent could take more members of the Associated Portsmouth taxpayers and do to them what he did to me. Very good job. But you have some, hey, Lucy Ricardo, you got some splaining to do. Thank you.
Portsmouth School Board, Lisa Sweet. I think you all know me, 259 Miller Ave. I'm not as prepared as I would like to be to speak, but I'm so happy to see as many people here as there are here. If I had to predict how many people might come out, I wouldn't have predicted quite as many. Year after year, when I sat up there with you, and even before that, parents came up, they asked for the same things every year. They asked for reasonable class size keeps rising. They say, we want elementary foreign language. We don't have that. Protect the core. You're doing your best, but you're not doing it, you know. You might think you're doing it, you can't. You're not doing it. It's hard. So I'm happy to see that so many people are still coming out to help you know what you need to do in this community for public education. I think, you know, the challenges before all of us are great due to the economic times, you know, and what's going on. The pressures on everyone are huge. And at the end of the day, I think we all want what's best for our community. So we all have to work together to try to move the ball toward that. And we're going to have to make a lot of difficult choices. I think when I was on the school board, one of the things I kept trying to do, that we all kept trying to do, is to say, how does the spending that Portsmouth does on public education compare with other communities? And that's a very difficult comparison to make. We have a different school structure than a lot of communities. You know, we've now Ed has given us a nice group of communities that we compare with. They have K-12 or pre-K to 12 education. You know, they're very similar to the programs we offer and similar in structure to us. So that's been very helpful. It's difficult to compare looking at an absolute property tax rate, because the property taxes and the property valuations are so different from community to community to community. So it's very difficult to look at an absolute tax rate and say, well, Portsmouth pays, you know, $17 for their tax rate, and some other community pays 26, and some other community pays 7. That's very difficult to do. What you can do is you can look at each community's tax rate, and you can say, okay, how much are you spending of your tax rate, whatever that tax rate is, how much are you spending on your local education? How much goes to other local? Because that's how it gets broken down in all the tax charts. And then what percent of that are you spending, what percent of your total are you spending on your local schools? What percent of your total are you spending on other local, your municipal budgets? And if you do that analysis, what you will find out is that Portsmouth is actually doing more with less in their schools. They're doing a lot more with less in their schools. On average, Portsmouth spends 9% less on their local schools than the New Hampshire average. If you look at the schools that are comparable to us, Portsmouth spends 10% less of their tax rate. 10% less of it goes toward their schools than towards other municipal or other taxes. 10% less than Merrimack, 10% less than Kentucky. and more than 20% less than Oyster River. So if you look at Oyster River, they're spending 20% more on their schools than Portsmouth is of their tax rate. We can't compare the tax rates, but we can compare which part of the pie, how big the part of the pie that goes towards schools are. Okay, so Portsmouth is doing really well. So don't let anybody tell you that just because schools are the biggest part of your budget, that that's a bad thing. That's irrelevant. That's like me saying, I need to cut my grocery bill so my 15-year-old son has to eat more like my 7-year-old daughter. It doesn't make sense. Just because something is the biggest doesn't mean you need to cut it, right? You do need to look and see, is there waste? Is there bloat? I don't think so. If we're spending 9% less than the average community in New Hampshire on our local education budget, we're doing pretty good. So I can share that analysis and those numbers with you because I don't know how well I've presented it. I think that let me see what else I have here. No, I got that. I think what we did last year, where we've decided to go is protecting that educational core, the academic core. So we're trying our very best not to take away from that. And like Mr. Brighton said, you really need to define what that is and what that means. But what I want to let you know is that protecting that academic core is more than just the teacher who stands in front of the room. You need to protect the curriculum. You need to protect the support for teachers to be able to collaborate with each other. You need to support professional development. That's very important. You can't keep cutting that year after year after year. You have to have support for the social, societal, and medical concerns that kids are coming in with every day. Okay? It's not just the person standing in front of the classroom. It's time with your students. It's time to make connections. It's all of the support for all of the things our kids are bringing in. If you think it's difficult to be a grown-up in this economy, try being a kid in this economy. You guys are the stewards of public education in Portsmouth. You need to maintain schools that work for all of our students, okay? That means all of ours. It's all the same group who comes out pretty much. So it's all of our kids, it's all of your kids, but it's all of Portsmouth's kids, and it's all of the parents who can't be here tonight and can't be here other nights for whatever reason. They can't be here. They can't come and they can't tell you. So you need to figure out what it is they need, because don't ever assume that just because they don't come here, it means that they don't care. Thank you.
Good evening. Perennial speaker Christopher Serlin, 89 Sparhawk Street. I really just have two things I want to convey tonight because I think a lot of people have already said a lot of the other things that I would. One is three. One is I know that you're doing, you have a really hard job in front of you, and for some reason a year ago I ran to have one of those jobs. So I don't know if you want my seat either, actually. I know that you're making tough choices, and I know that you're approaching this critically. I know you're thinking through this. The two things that I have to say, one is I want to simply ask, I'm not expecting an answer right now, energy is a passion of mine, energy consumption and cost, and I would like to know more from members of the board at a future date what you all have been doing or whether you have engaged other individuals to explore offsets to energy costs. And the reason I'm passionate about energy is our municipal facilities use a lot of energy. Energy costs will never go down, they will always go up. And they're a key component of your budget. I don't know exactly how much a part of your budget they are, but there are proven ways to offset energy costs and fix pricing for the long term, meaning 20 to 25 years in that space. And so I'd be very interested in hearing more from you, even working with you if you'd like to contact me, to start that conversation about what the school system can do, similar to what other school systems are doing, to leverage alternative energy sources as a partial offset. It's not huge money, but it's money. The second thing is, it's really not just for you, because I suspect you know this, but also for the people who are here tonight. When my concern as a father of children who are in the Portsmouth school system, and my concern for American school children in general, is number one, as the world is becoming an increasingly competitive space for them to graduate into and work in, when other countries are investing far a greater amount of money per pupil than perhaps even we are, and pushing technology and language instruction down to much lower grades than we are currently now able to afford because of some of the choices that we've made, not necessarily you as individuals, but over time as a society. Our children are becoming less and less competitive over the long term. Each individual that comes out of our schools, they're getting a good education, but if you put them up against children from other countries, they are not going to have the same skill sets. They are not going to be able to converse in the various languages of the world. Technology is, of course, an ever-increasing component of the fabric of society around us. It's critical. I also come from a technology background. That's what I do for a living. In the corporate world, where, of course, that's a for-profit world, companies refresh their technology every 2 to 3 years because they have to stay competitive and to stay productive. School systems can't afford to do that because people just generally don't want to see you buy another computer if the one you've got that's 5 years old is still kicking around. That sort of mentality is affecting the skill sets that our children come out of school with. My overall concern, and I know that you all are fighting against this, but for the people who are listening, is that when the going gets tough and the dollars are short, people start making, in my opinion, or pressuring others to make poor decisions for the long term. As an example of that, for the record, I'm also one of 7 legislators representing Portsmouth and Newington. There is a bill in the Education Committee right now, sponsored by a representative, that would trim the components of the core educational standards, which of course might make the job of school boards like you a little easier, even if you didn't like the idea of it, by, and if you pardon me, I'm just going to read this, cutting out from the core standards arts education, all world language, health education, technology education, information and communications technologies. When people are under pressure, they make, in my personal opinion, stupid decisions about what to do in the short term. I'm not talking about the decisions that you will make. I'm really talking about the pressure that you will be put under to cut certain things that might not, and I respectfully disagree, be reading, writing, or arithmetic. I think we should be investing far heavily in these very things that some people want to cut to meet budget goals. And it's a tough fight, and I'm not expecting any sort of an answer from you as a collective group, but as a parent, I stand behind you, and if you resist the pressures that you're facing to cut teachers or equipment in these areas, I will stand behind you, and I will explain to anybody that you need me to explain to what it means for a kid to have exposure to computer science technologies in the elementary grade levels, not middle school, elementary grade levels, and world language, so that they can be competitive on the world stage as they age 15 to 20 years from now. I know you all know that, but my concern is that you're not only just, as a school board, facing pressure from the local municipality, you have people up in Concord writing bills to slash the core standards so they can save a couple bucks now, and that's only going to hurt one group of people, and that's our kids. So I appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you. This is still the first round, so anybody who would like to get up and make a few comments, please step up to the microphone. Okay. Well, so that would be the end of the first round. We'll put a little more pressure on you the second time around. So if you've already spoken and you'd like to speak again, you may. But I would also encourage those of you who haven't spoken yet, if you feel the spirit, to stand up, come up to the microphone. So round two.
I just jotted down a whole bunch of additional information. Once again, Patrick Ellis, 235 McKinley Road. I want to define what a cut is. Although the total dollars spent by the school may be only marginally higher than they were last year or the year before or the year before that, the reality is that because of fixed increases to salaries, benefits, down funding from the state for retirement, things of that sort, the reality is that programs have been cut to maintain the small growth that the school budget is seeing. You all know that. I want to make sure the folks at home watching understand that as well, that significant cuts have been made the last several years. We're talking about cuts tonight. We're talking about the elimination of the special ed coordinator, elimination of the technology director, elimination of two classroom teachers at the middle school. That's what's being proposed right now. Those are real cuts. Cuts have been made in the past. Things like foreign language at the elementary level that once existed no longer exist now. Cuts have been made. And that's what we're all scared of, is those additional cuts, that the additional $400,000 you may need to come up with, what that's going to look like. Moving on to a few other items, perhaps some information to try to be a little bit more proactive. The first one, Ed, last year you put together a fabulous resource with a budget book. I'm not sure if you intend to do that again. I thought it was a wonderful resource. I walked around with it for 4 months. It had great data, great information to show to people so that they would understand some of the dynamics. The more information on the comparison to those other school districts in our cohort that can be included in there, the better. Kent brought up last year, and it was discussed again Tuesday night, the idea of a grant writer. I think that I don't think it can hurt to craft a job design where the person is not heavily funded by our budget. Maybe you can't find a person to fill the position, but if you essentially make it a commission-only position, economy's tough. Broadcast the announcement, throughout the country. There is, over the country, 10% unemployment. Can we find a grant writer out there who is willing to come in and work on commission? It would only be a benefit to the city of Portsmouth to have those additional grants coming in. There's a lot of grants that we're not going to qualify for, but there's not a lot of exposure if that position is mostly funded by essentially a commission program. It's been discussed before. I know that the contract is quite complicated in this regard. I thought I'd heard it mentioned a few weeks back. I was hoping to hear something about it on Tuesday. I didn't, and that is, should we look at privatizing the food service? I know that I'm personally not very impressed with the food service at the elementary school. It does seem to get better when you get to the middle school and better again when you get to the high school, but it's not a stellar program now. I wonder if we can save money and have a better program by privatizing it. I don't believe that this next idea is good for the children of Portsmouth, but I'm asking you to look at it and weigh the decision. What has a worse impact on the children of Portsmouth? To eliminate additional classroom teachers, eliminate the technology director, or look at pay to play? I don't think it's good for our kids, but I think I'd rather try to have a system where those barriers are as small as possible, but I'd rather try to have a system that generates some revenue for those extracurriculars than see us lose technology director, to see us losing teachers in the classroom. Chris Serlin's left. I should have brought this one up first. He mentioned that energy isn't, that renewable energy may not be a huge impact on the budget, but my quick flip through, I think it's $1 million that the school spends on energy. I think that's the line item that I saw. So if we can put up whatever it may be, whether it be geothermal, solar, wind, wood fuel for heating at any of our schools. Any of those items, if they can help reduce our energy expenditure by 10%, that's a significant savings and something that's worth looking at. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Rob Hieden again, 130 FW Hartford Drive. Just piggybacking from his thoughts here, has anybody thought about the idea of, say, a corporate sponsorship or donation program of, we have, lots of companies donate laptops or technology supplies, things like that in exchange for, some promotional consideration. You have, not that we want the Nike logo splashed all over the high school here, but see if we can get some local companies to donate some things for the educational systems here in exchange for the goodwill that generates. For me personally, I have a small business, and we had some old laptops that we needed to get rid of. We actually donated to my children's preschool, and it strikes me that there may be a lot of people out there that can have similar things that they could donate to the schools that they just may not be thinking about it right now. I'm sure there's a tax write-off or other things that could be publicized to that effect. So just a thought. Thank you.
A cut budget means only one thing. It means that you're spending less money than the year before. But Mr. Ellis has nailed it exactly, the 500-pound gorilla that is sitting in the room. He's talking about program cuts. The reason we're having program cuts is, and here's the 500-pound gorilla, is the fact that the teachers' unions they're putting the money, there's no gentle way to put this, but then again, I'm not noted for being gentle. As opposed to applying pressure to the school board or the taxpayer, why don't you call your teachers and ask them to renegotiate the contract? The money is going in their pockets and it's being taken from your kids. That is where it's being taken from. It's not, the Portsmouth taxpayers have always been generous in giving money to the school department. It has been years since there has been an actual cut. The money is going to the teachers' pockets. I don't blame them. I would do it too. But why don't you call them and say, hey, we want to give our kids something instead of putting the money in your pocket. And please, don't tell me that you're not going to be attracting teachers. Please, I don't want to hear that. There's no evidence for that. Portsmouth is an attractive community. Yeah, there's just no gentle way to put it, but he has nailed it. The 500-pound gorilla in the room, the teachers' union. Thank you.
Very briefly, on the academic core piece, the technology director, we've made huge strides at the middle school with the $150,000 grant that we've been working with, and it's amazing what having a laptop and a projector can do to your teaching. It's amazing. You open up the entire internet to your class. So I can show my science class that when you drop a feather and a hammer on the moon, they hit at the same time. My high school son's science teacher can't do that. They don't have a laptop. They don't have projectors in their class. It's amazing what that grant has opened up for us and the things that you can do with it. It'd be great to have a technology director to take what we've learned and put that into schools in a way that makes sense. You know, who owns that if we don't have a technology director? Special services director, I can't comment on that. I wouldn't know where to begin. Middle school, freeing up the English language arts teachers. That means that my 7th grader, or actually any 7th and 8th grader, next year is going to have 30% less language arts than the kids have had up until now. So that's your academic core. Those are just kind of what those cuts are looking like right now. And I don't know where you find it anywhere else. I mean, I wish I could get up here and say, oh, I can tell you 10 things you could cut. I can't, but I would like to. But that's just what I'm seeing on these two slides that I just saw for the first time. So think about that. And ask the kids, what makes you successful? Ask them.
Good evening. Bill St. Laurent, 253 Colonial Drive, represented the Taxpayers Association. I basically came tonight to observe what was being brought up here tonight toward the budget, and looking forward to seeing your budget. There were no budget presentations tonight. I'm sorry I'm late. I came late. Did you have some kind of a budget formula yet, or are we just discussing the budget tonight? I'm sorry, I'm lost with this meeting.
The budget presentation was made on Tuesday.
Okay. Okay. It was made on Tuesday. I'm sorry. I did not. I was not able to make it. So, just as an observation, as speaking for the taxpayers, and a lot of people say, well, you're not speaking for all the taxpayers. No, but I'm speaking for a lot of them that won't come here tonight. And the reason they won't come here is because they feel somewhat, I don't know, intimidated, but they know that you're there to help the children in the city of Portsmouth. And that's usually the big focus on all of your responsibility of all of your positions here as a school board. But there's also the taxpayer. I mean, you're elected by the taxpayer. And there are many taxpayers, like I said, that won't come, older taxpayers, that even believe they shouldn't even support the school system. They've done it for years. That portion of their taxes should be removed. I mean, they're in their 70s and 80s, and they said, we don't have kids in the school anymore. We supported it when our kids went to school, and for years after that. So I get it. I get a lot of requests from a lot of people asking me, when you speak for us. And most of the budget hearings and the work sessions and the things that I attend, especially for the school department, are geared, and most of the people that speak are geared for their children. And personally, I think you've done well with the children. I think the children have a very good education in the city of Portsmouth. And I don't think it needs to be, I don't think throwing more money at it's going to make it any better, because it's what it is right now. It's what you've given us over the years. The taxpayers have been very generous. Here's a good site right here is this addition, $40 million addition to the high school. Taxpayers were very generous with this. There was not a lot of objection to it. And now the middle school. You don't hear a lot of objection to that, and that's going along. I don't know how much more you can take from the people of Portsmouth. You've got to keep these budgets either level or reduce them. I'm hearing that there's an overabundance of people working for the school, for the whole city. We are the second highest employer in the city of Portsmouth, which means we have too many people working for the city of Portsmouth, and the taxpayers are bearing the burden for that. And when the taxpayers are generous with you to give you these buildings, you throw air conditioning in there. There's another expense that is burdened by the taxpayer that you add to your budget every year. So all these things, I mean, we're not in Florida. Why are you giving air conditioning in these buildings? I'm hearing now the middle school has got to have air conditioning. We're in New England. We may have 3 or 4 really hot months out of the year, and usually it's July. Kids aren't in school. So these are things I would hope that you would consider. Then there are other things that people come to me and ask, and I don't know why they don't go to you. They should. Why are charter schools and private schools less per student? They see it in the paper. They don't understand it. Have you explained to the people why we're paying $13,000 or $14,000 per student and it's only costing $6,000 to $7,000 in St. Pat's or charter schools? They don't hear that from you, and then they look at that and say, why are we paying all these taxes? Why isn't the school board helping us out? Then the other question is, there's a drop in the birth rate. We keep hearing there's a more need for classrooms, that teachers have to have 15 students per class. Well, if there's a reduction, why do we still have the same amount of teachers? When we reduced Ps, there was no reduction in teachers. And there was a big loss. You're saying no? Not the first year, but they all came back within a year or two. But these are the things that the people are asking me about. They should be asking you, not me. But they do come to me. I don't know why. And I tell them, go to the school board. And they say, well, they're not listening. They're only interested in the interest of the children and not the taxpayer. And they'll just spend until the taxpayer can't afford it anymore. This is a countrywide problem. This is not just hitting Portsmouth. Taxes are out of sight everywhere. And states and communities are complaining about what to do next. Where are they going to get the money? The taxpayers only have such deep pockets, and you can't keep going after them. You've got to start looking at ways of keeping the budgets level or reducing them. I see this as a taxpayer's precedent, and that's about all I can explain now. But these people don't come to you, and it was mentioned tonight that that a lot of people will not come and speak. Well, most of the people that don't want their budgets increases never come out and speak because they feel it's fruitless because you're not listening. Thank you.
Anyone else in round two? Okay, so we'll close round two and we'll open up the last opportunity for anyone who's already spoken. You may come up to the microphone again, and for those of you who haven't yet, we encourage you to step forward. Any takers? Okay. So we'll close the public hearing. I do want to thank every one of you who came out.
You're going to recess it to the next.
Oh, correct. Okay. That's right. We do have a second one scheduled for February 8th. That one will be at City Hall. Thank you, Kent. So the public hearing will be in recess until that second one coming up in a few weeks. Okay?
Can you explain that process and the dates going forward till we get up to the end?
What are we doing between now and then?
No, you have another meeting, February 8th.
February 8th is a second public hearing for people to come out again and talk to the school board and let us know what you're thinking. And we'll be a little bit further along the line in terms of the direction we're moving, and we still want to be able to hear from people, and you don't even need to come to the public hearing if you want to contact us as well.
And then when do you have to have your final one for the final?
I think it's the 10th, February 10th.
February.
Yeah, it's a very short window.
Different.
Well, it's a little shorter than last year, but it's about the same as it was last year. It's shorter than it used to be. So, okay.
I have a question. Can you explain to me, and I know a lot of people have spoken here tonight, but explain how you
You need to go to the microphone.
Okay. Sorry. I'm just curious, can you explain the process of how you folks, digest what we've talked about here tonight, and how we might be able to see that in action in the deliberations of the school board and the outcome of the new budget?
Well, what I can say without really getting into a conversation, because it's not the purpose, is that we have our next few meetings scheduled. There will be work sessions between now and then when the budget is due. We're going to talk about specifically, like the work session this evening is going to be a conversation about the central office reorganization and how the district's going to deal with that and the plans for that. And then we're going to move towards looking at the schools, and we'll incorporate comments and thoughts that came out tonight and our own comments and thoughts as well. Once again, I want to thank you all for coming out. You're more than welcome to stay, but I understand it if you feel like you want to leave.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, just a
Yes.
couple of points in regards to the public is that also that the public's invited to every one of those work sessions.
Oh, yes.
Okay, I want to make sure.
Okay, so the point, just to be clear, every meeting that the school board has, the public is always invited to. It's not necessarily just a school board meeting, but even the budget work sessions, and it's not just public hearings. So by all means.
Also, Mr. Chairman, I mean, there should be 3 corrections because, there were a couple comments made that, one is that, no, I just want to make sure that for records.
You're talking about factual?
Factual. Because it was mentioned that, we had German. German was cut in 1997, okay? And the high school was not $40 million. It was a $29 million project. So I want to make sure, because numbers seem to grow and have its own face out there.
Thank you. Okay. We have to use the microphones. So I think what we'll do now is we'll move to the superintendent and we'll begin our work session looking at central office. And welcome, Tom. I'm glad you made it, Tom. How's the traffic? Terrible. Okay.
So you have some materials I think we prepared for you this evening. The first one is really to kind of share with the board our thinking around central office configuration. And so there is a document that says at the top cohort data. And you'll see 2010-11 central office configurations of the 5-school cohort group. Should look like this.
On the back of something.
On the back of.
On the back of the.
Looks like this.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
And so in going out and visiting various schools, we looked at how they were configured. We were interested in that. And as you'll note, the cohort is Portsmouth, the Governor Wentworth School District, Merrimack Valley, Contoocook Valley, and Oyster River. Those were the 3 that were very similar situated. As you recall, Oyster River was one that was considered best in class, high performing. Not surprisingly, all 5 have a superintendent of schools. You'll note that 4 out of 5 have an assistant superintendent of schools. When we looked at who had a title of curriculum and instruction director, Governor Wentworth also had one of those. Contoocook had one. And then Oyster River, which was the one that did not have an assistant superintendent, had essentially 2 directors of instruction. One who had been assigned duties for special education, and the other had taken on technology director duties. When you look at what we enjoy for for pupil services Title I, you'll see that 2 out of 5 in the cohort have that. All 5 have business administrators. Only 2 have a human resources manager, and of course we share that position with the city. 2 of the 5 have facilities managers, and only 3 of the 5 have what's called technology directors. And I would share with folks that in the instance outside of Portsmouth, those the position is really one of a technical nature, i.e. a network director, somebody that oversees the technicians, more so than an instructional director. And then each of the departments, all 5 of the schools in the cohort had at least 3 full-time equivalents working in the business office doing bookkeeping, payroll, and accounts payable, receivable. And then you see the amount of clericals listed, where Portsmouth has 5.5, Governor Wentworth had 3.5, Merrimack 3, Contoocook 6, and Oyster River 3. So you have that comparative data to see how we measured up, and we're kind of right in the middle of the pack. I did want to share with you, and these are just interesting side notes, I mean, because I think for anyone to think the central office staffing is high, there are a lot of ways to measure central office staffing, and these are a couple of snapshots to look at it. This really comes out of the National Survey of Staffing Patterns in Public School Systems, updated in 2010, that was done by the Educational Research Service. And so if you looked at our total expenditure of budget, central office, you would see that in FY11, this current year, we're spending just over $1 million in terms of, I'm on the right-hand pie chart now, in terms of expenditure, which means we spend 2.7% of our budget on central office in this current year. Typically, some states, have this notion about what's an efficient and effective system-wide administration, and they usually set that target at 4% or below. So when you look at our central office staffing, you'll see even as we currently talk about it, it's significantly lower. The other way to look at it was the kind of the bar graph on the left-hand side, which is to say how many, based on the number of FTEs, how many central office professional administrators might one have. And you can see that in the most recent year, 2009, for every, this is nationwide now, for every central office administrator you have some basically 31.7. That would suggest we would have 7.44 professionals in central office. That's not the case. We have 236 full-time equivalent teachers in our general fund budget, but we have 5 professionals currently operating in central office. So that's the cohort data. But what intrigued us about this was really the way Oyster River had configured its 2 directors of instruction. And we came back as an administrative team, had conversations about it, and it really led to, I think, the decision that we looked at assigning Mr. Zadrovic the instructional duties. And I would remind folks that we would still enjoy Tom Lotz, who has long been kind of the network fellow. He's the infrastructure fellow, and he coordinates some 5 FTE technicians. We would still, as a district, enjoy our technology integrators that we have. One at each of the elementary schools. We have Rhonda Johnson, who's moved over and done a very nice job at the middle school. And then, of course, Tara Mary, who I know you've seen a presentation from early here in September as a technology integrator there. The special ed piece, and looking to kind of consolidate that, we were really impressed with the notion that you could upgrade coordinator positions. One of the truths is we have a coordinator, a special ed coordinator's position at the middle school. Mr. Martell serves in that capacity. At the high school, something's been lost in translation where 2 full-time equivalents are now called department heads. And they have a reduced load, but they're not a coordinator. And then we've had Beth Satir, who is obviously running the P program and has served as, her title is coordinator, K-5 coordinator, and she moves across the buildings. So we really gave thinking that we could shift those duties to our director of Title I services, that she works with the reading and the intensive support there. And as we've gone through this focused monitoring process this year with the state, where they're coming in and working with us to set up an action plan, that we might be able to blur the lines between special ed support and the level of support we provide our children in reading instruction. And if we strengthen the building level coordinator's position, we'd be better served for this. So that's why we're making the recommendation we're making. I also want to share in terms, so that kind of paints the picture. We really are looking at this Oyster River model very closely. Looked at job descriptions, and we'll present a job description for all these positions to you along the way this evening. We'll suggest changes to Mr. Zadrovic's position. we'll suggest when we talk about maintenance a little bit later, changes there, and then next week as well. So we'll be laying out a number of job descriptions so you have some assurance as to how we're going to move forward and do this work. Maybe I should pause and give you a chance to ask questions about what you see in front of you here.
Ed, the only one I thought that might have been missing out of that formula under the special ed is that, we do have a director at the Robert Lister Academy that I believe, could be well sewn into that. I know you and I have had that discussion, but we do have, I hate to use the word of plethora, but there are these scatterings that you have now just seen after your first full year under your own budget. And again, I didn't know if you had input towards that, whether that is a position you would look at to spread her wealth to help coordinate certain things.
Well, we really, I think of Ms. Roy as a principal directing her building, less than, it's in the case of special ed and special services. So we really didn't factor that into the calculus. But, we left that aside. Not to say we shouldn't.
In terms of the the computer with Steve dealing with the instructional aspect, does that mean that he would be supervising the integrators? That would be.
Yes, and Steve's going to get a piece to talk directly about the technology aspects of it. Mr. Bartlett will talk about the changes we're proposing in maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to give you kind of this broad
Yeah.
context for why we made the recommendations we did at system-wide central office that we did. It was clear that we, I don't want folks to think that we go in this with full assurance that we're not going to work harder, be flatter, be leaner as an organization. I think, we're taking some risks here. But it was done all in the interest of protecting the core, and I'll also address that a little bit later on and share with you a copy of the minimum state standards, which I think is a wonderful framework to begin to define what you mean by core. I think Representative Serlin talked about the suggestion that 4 or 5 of those may come away, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well.
So, Ed, I don't want to take the focus away from the proposed reductions you have in the technology director and the special services director, but I notice here that 3 of our 4 peer groups don't have a facilities manager, and I'm wondering if you had an opportunity when you explored these districts, if they explained how they manage their facilities, and I mean, if not, is there any opportunity to learn something there?
Yeah, so you'll notice Governor Wentworth has 2, and quite honestly, they just built a nice performing arts center. And they're actually going to make that a major rental, through the summer and bring in outside groups, et cetera. Steve and I actually got to see it the night before they kind of unveiled it. So that explains why they have 2. At Merrimack, what's really interesting, you talked about energy. They have a middle school and high school and superintendent's office all in one contiguous campus, and they were the first ones to go with the chip burning plant facility, and it's all been piped underground. And so they have a different position that didn't fit in a central office administration, but they clearly have someone running that facility. Absolutely. It just didn't show up as a CO position. And the others?
Is Oyster River, is there anything they're doing there that may be
We didn't talk at length about that, in all honesty.
okay.
But I could follow up for you. I could do that.
Everything looks, I I like the fact that everything is focused around working smarter, and though there are some risks, we might actually find out that having some cross functionality might actually provide some unhidden benefits down the road. Looking at the cohort data, curious about the private sector and private schools, prep schools, in terms of are there anything that we could learn from their model? Their model might be stacked a lot heavier, or they might be stacked leaner. I don't know. Taking a look at some of our schools that are close by, I don't know if that's a necessary addition, but just curious. Do they operate differently because of the funding and the model that they build versus what a private or versus what a traditional public school would be like? It might not be worth the effort. I'm just curious.
I haven't looked at it personally to say with any certainty what you're thinking of St. Thomas or Berwick Academy when we think about Phillips Exeter. Student-teacher ratio is very nice.
Apples to apples? Not quite a peer comparison.
No, it's definitely not a peer comparison, but St. Thomas might be a much more closer fit.
So I just have a quick question. If I understood what you were saying as you were talking about these national numbers in comparison to what we have here in Portsmouth, so you're saying that given the number of teachers we have 5 professional staff in central office, whereas if we were to follow the ratios that sort of the national average, we should have 7.5 professionals in central office. Did I understand that?
That's right. If you're looking at averages,
right,
statistically across the country, that's right.
Okay. And you're going to talk more about the SPED coordinator tonight?
No, that's a separate workshop setting a week from
so then,
tonight.
So I guess I just want to re-understand what you were suggesting. So we have a SPED coordinator at the middle school now. We have 2 FTEs of coordinators at the high school.
Department heads, they're called here at the high school. And I don't know if something got lost in translation over time or what have you, but that's how it's currently.
One for K-5 and early and PEEP.
Yes.
And those are the positions that will then be reporting to the Title I.
Right. So we're looking to enhance that level of coordination at the buildings. But we would still have this is my phrase, a backstop at central office, i.e. putting some of those duties to, and you'll see that job description next week too, the Pupil Services Director, Joanne Simons, who's Title I currently.
Okay.
Looking to blur the lines, so to speak, between the student support.
Any other questions?
So I guess I'll turn it over to Mr. Zadrovic first, who'll talk a little bit about the technology and his revised job description. So, Steve?
Sure. In your packet, you have a copy of the job description that was put together and approved by the board last March for my position. And what we've done is essentially just to again, be clear about the roles, responsibilities, is we've added on to that job description the elements of technology supervision that were previously on the job description of the Director of Technology. So, and I have them there in bold and italics, and I guess we won't go through all of that, but I would point out a good deal of crossover and overlap that has always existed between those two positions, and looking at the areas of curriculum, the areas of professional development, and we certainly worked as a team on much of that. And I do want to emphasize in this shift is what we won't lose sight of is the good work and the progress that I think we're making around technology. And there's a lot of great work, I know some of you came with me from a curriculum council meeting today. We had a presentation from the high school math department on their work to integrate technology and to utilize that for student learning. We had a presentation earlier in the year from the middle school, and we really do have teacher leaders in each building. We have teachers in our system that do training actually for other districts around their use of technology, and what we need to do is do a better job of using them to train our own teachers. And so, we have teachers teaching online courses for the Virtual Learning Academy, and, we can utilize that and leverage that to have our students do more with online learning. So I think there's a lot of good momentum around technology, and what we'd want to do is certainly establish something that keeps a vision and keeps sight of that in line with the technology plan that this board had approved, and we're certainly looking to build on that. So operationally, the job that we'll have here is to establish a team that's focused on technology. And while my focus will primarily be with the technology integrators and those working most directly with teachers, I'll also obviously be working very closely with Tom Lotz, our network administrator, who really oversees a great deal of our, as Ed mentioned, our technology infrastructure presently. and does a great job with that. And I think we want to certainly be smart about going forward with that and to make sure that we're sort of putting together the infrastructure necessary to support the advances in student learning and technology integration that we're making. One piece of that, of course, is the support from a technician perspective. And so the last page of on the back of my job description, there is a technical support plan. As you recall, our proposed budget also includes a reduction of one technician and really sort of a readjustment as one technician was added last year, pulling that back. But then fashioning a plan, as Tom Lotz has put together here, to say we can still establish a level of support and service to each of the schools. We can do that in a structured way to make sure that there's a regular presence in each of the schools, but also, and we've had this conversation a number of times, make sure that we're strategic about where that support is based on the need. And that is to say, for example, when the middle school is doing their project on establishing a heavy influence of technology, and they have a 3-week unit, that we're sure and proactively plan for the technical support necessary for those teachers to pull that off. So I think we just being more proactive in how we deal with a technical support issue, I think will help us head off any or most of the technical issues we may see. So that's the way the plan shakes out in terms of some of the technical support, some of the changes in my job description, but really, on the ground, it's going to be about sustaining the enthusiasm and the effort and the integration that's happening in each of the schools right now. And as you recall from last year, our reorganization of the elementary program included a real concrete objective this year, which was to have every student complete and exhibit a digital portfolio project and really push that work around integrating into every classroom. And so as the elementary principals, I think when they last reported to you, had reported out some of the progress made around that. That was still early in the year, and we certainly expect that by the end of this year we will finish that. We will reach that goal of having every elementary student have a digital portfolio project completed. And so all of that sort of feeds together into the work that's happening in each building. But we certainly want to keep the focus on student learning and on integration.
We heard loud and clear tonight in the public commentary that there's significant concern about technology and the investments we've made, even before we've considered eliminating the director position. And so what I'd ask as part of the budget process, because I think, in fact, we are doing a lot of good things, setting aside the limitation we have in acquiring more hardware, desktops and iPads and the other stuff, just given our budget. But I think it'll be important that we demonstrate that directionally we have a sound plan, and we have a sound operating plan to make it happen. And some of the things you described, I would ask that we set down on paper in some way, and maybe also on that document include the initiatives that are underway now and how we plan to integrate them going into the next school year. To be able to firstly convince ourselves that in fact this is we have the right approach, but also to demonstrate to clearly a lot of the community who have a concern that firstly we're not investing enough, and secondly we're cutting what they perceive as a key position. And if we can sort of put that down, not in a lengthy document, but in a document that can be handed out to people, can be posted on our website, can be included in the budget presentation, I think will be really helpful.
Absolutely, we can do that.
Thanks.
Just a quick question. Is any of that already in your approved technology plan?
It is, but I think we need to put
Tweak
that in
that
the form of communicating a
Peel
plan.
it out, though, so
Right,
you
so that
you
it's-
you have a summary.
Right.
So you don't have to wade through 20 pages.
Right, but all those pieces should be partially in there, and then they can be pulled out, teased out, and and amplified.
Well, and I think Dexter's point is well taken, that this is a critical time for us to be able to communicate that and make sure that's widely known. So we could definitely put together a way for the public to see that plan.
Thank you.
So my question, I mean, I think I have some of the concerns that people in the community have, but I have faith in the district to actually be successful in what it says it would like to do. But my question really for you would be, I know you're doing some of this already because you work with Curriculum Council, and I know you're involved with technology and working with teachers. But in what other ways might you see this impacting other responsibilities that you might end up needing to give less time to?
Well, I think, you know, the thing with technology that I think we've sort of shifted our thinking around is you know, as you know, there was a time when technology was seen as its own individual content area, and student learning was about technology, and now student learning is with technology. And I think the challenge in front of us, and I think you know, I don't see a putting aside of any existing responsibility. I see more of how do we integrate, how do we be more deliberate and thoughtful about integrating technology into all of the things that we're doing, and I think that's the critical piece. I do think, though, another opportunity, and I know we've talked about this before as well, is how technology becomes a tool to help us more efficiently and more effectively get things done that we're trying to do. And that's where, you know, one of the things from the presentation at Curriculum Council today was the utilization of Moodle, for example, as a way for students to communicate with each other. We've been working to get Moodle as a way for teachers to communicate with each other. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there, a lot of synergy with moving on that. But I wouldn't say anything that's you know, within my realm existing would be something I could see putting aside.
I just add one other comment that you know, my view of technology is that it absolutely isn't a separate component. That, you know, today technology is an integrated part of curriculum, and so, you know, I think Steve's already doing a lot of it. My, you know, concern is more towards your point of just making sure people understand that, you know, we're not necessarily taking away from technology, that we're actually moving things forward. This is just a slightly different plan. That, you know, things have evolved, and this is part of the evolution. And so that's the key of the message, is that, you know, losing this it's not a loss. You know, we're gaining a stronger focus about how we're going to implement on existing technology plans.
Also, in regard to the workshop that we saw today, I was also using Moodle and the use of electronic books instead of buying new math books that were very frequently outdated really, really fast, that they have the books online, and that will be our view to the future, and really right now. So that was very impressive, that whole program.
And so, want to talk. We're going to switch gears entirely then, and you know, we're talking two positions then: the FTE, who is a technician, and you saw the plan to deploy that and operationalize that, and Steve would assume those duties. I'd like to talk a little bit about maintenance and Ken Lynch's position. We're suggesting a reduction of one FTE in terms of the maintenance department. We have Ken's upgraded job description, as well as kind of the energy cost, which came up this evening, which is important, I think, to look at, because it is a modest adjustment going downward, and the board may have some questions about that as well.
Okay, I believe in your packets you were provided with a revised job description for the Ken Lynch's position, which is that of maintenance and facility supervisor. And I guess basically, in order to reduce things, and we look at sort of reinventing and consolidating and flattening out, or lean and mean, as the superintendent has suggested, is that what we did in modifying this approach and this job description was essentially took the dotted lines on the organizational chart and made them less dotted and more solid. What that accomplishes for us, I think, is that we're able to consolidate the input and the coordination points in the buildings across the district, and so that we can make our best effort at standardizing, cleaning, maintenance, and usage issues across the district, as opposed to having a lot of minute differences in each building. I think doing that, streamlining that coordination by changing the facility director's position in terms of the rest of the custodial maintenance staff and how he coordinates with the principals, I think will only add to our efficiencies and economies of scale. And so that was our thinking behind making that modification. And as the superintendent has mentioned, we have proposed a reduction of one FTE in the maintenance department. Also attached to this job description, you'll see is a complete list of staffing levels throughout the district. First part's by department, and the rest is by because they go across the entire district, and then the rest go by building. And on the right-hand side, we have the average square footage allotted per person. And one of the things that Ken and I have done since I came, and we've been fortunate that New Hampshire DOE has a gentleman by the name of Ed Murdo who works with their building program, and he does a lot of coordination with the districts and SAUs throughout the state in terms of anything to do with buildings, cleaning, air quality. I mean, that's his hat. And so what he's able to do is point us in directions that we need to, get these data points. And so these are the averages that we have in the district, and we've tried to compare those and see how we are favorably with, what national averages or state averages. And we're not over in terms of staffing levels on the custodial side, which was why we didn't, make any additional eliminations there. We have, at every opportunity, we do our best to rethink, perhaps, not necessarily job descriptions for custodians, but time frames to adjust them in terms of, what's happening in each of the buildings. So over the past couple of years, we've made a few adjustments. We've made a couple of adjustments just in the last couple of weeks. So again, at the maintenance level, at the custodial level, we're doing our best to try to come up with a flatter, more consolidated, efficient grouping of employees. But I think that's really the only way we're going to survive and keep up our standards in terms of the decreasing budget dollars. And I guess before I came, because I was at the planning board meeting representing the school district for the capital improvement plan presentation, and the superintendent mentioned that you talked a little bit about energy, and noticed that in our initial pass of the budget, we tried to make some modest changes. And so we do have a software program that we've used for a couple of years, and now we have several years worth of data. And so we load in units and dollars. And so this report that Kenny did up for us shows the dollar side, so we can average out for the last 3 years. The other piece that isn't here, but which we can provide as part of the picture, is but do it by units as well, so we can graph it, we can compare it. And so that's a tool that we've been using for a couple of years, and that has, I think, contributed to the savings and changes in the energy management systems that Mr. Lynchy has made.
Under the utilization page that you have, and the averages, one thing I do see missing off of here, and I do think it's important because I think many people are under the misconception that we get free water, and the water is actually a very large cost and one that I wish we had better control as we're replacing buildings and so forth. And I still look at it as one of the areas that we probably looked not as well at when we did the high school was, reduced flush and it's, I don't think we're going to see, as you and I, Steve, have talked, a great reduction on water costs because you still have to sprinkle down or you will lose the all-purpose field. But I would hope there are. I'm always astonished that we don't get any type of break. We pay the corporate rate for water just like anybody else. And what has always irritated me about it is we don't get, as far as I can understand, a real reduction on the sewage part of the bill. And that's always bothered me too. Thank you.
Well, thanks for reminding me because that was one thing. It's been a long day and I forgot that one piece because I didn't write it down. But I guess the point that we wanted to make is you can see the 3-year average, and of course it doesn't match what you've got on the budget sheet. And the reason for that is, of course, that the water and sewer is included as it. That says energy, and maybe it should say utilities. But then if it says utilities, then people say, well, what about phones? So historically, energy is natural gas, electricity, water and sewer, and the occasional diesel fuel for the generators. So which is very minor, and so that's why the two don't really match or cross because we had to leave the water and sewer in there. And at the moment, we don't have estimates for next year's water and sewer rates for the increase. We've had an increase every year so far, so we're just hedging our bets that we'll be able to be in the guidelines. So thank you for reminding me of that.
Stephen, I just have a quick question. So on this new job description, short of actually going back and looking at at the earlier one, how do we know what's different in this one?
Actually, I guess unless we did one of those fancy computer mark things where we highlighted the changes, you wouldn't know, and I apologize for that. Basically, anything that was considered to be a dotted line of authority last time, we changed to a solid line of authority. So the model that we've been under for a number of years has been that the custodians report to the custodial supervisors report the solid line to the building administrator, and then a dotted line to Mr. Lynchy. And so with the focus on being lean and redoing everything on the academic side, we're sort of flipping that a little bit and trying to take most of the coordination for that and putting it in Mr. Lynchy's corner, and still working closely with each building administrator, but freeing them up more to do other things. So that's really the basic change, is that he would have more oversight and responsibility for more people and for building usage and things like that. Does that help? And we probably could do one of those marked up ones if that would be preferable.
Tom.
Even if we don't have time during the budget, I'd like to see if the administration would put together, maybe an energy, workshop. And the thing we've talked about and noodled around is that, the opportunity being in the educational space to find ways to link in, energy, whether it's solar, whether it's algae production for biofuels, the opportunity to link in educational opportunities with energy, and we also know that in our own paper and in the broader regional area, there's a lot of other educational districts that are doing things. We know that the largest solar facility in the state of New Hampshire is sitting on the top of Exeter, the Exeter School District. We've got other districts that are starting to look at biofuels. So, just to give us an opportunity to talk about it more broadly, knowing full well that we're not going to be able to impact the budget discussion. I wouldn't want to take up the time, but once we get through this for March or April, I think it's a good opportunity to really, open up the book and see where we can take a look at, being creative on the energy side.
Okay, well, that sort of ties in with one of Ken's comments, which I guess for me it doesn't stand out as much because it's a standard thing that Ken and I work on all the time, is that every opportunity that we get when we're replacing something, we try to look down the road and replace it. So in terms of, if we get a hot water heater, say, that's the old-fashioned where it sits there and you keep heating and heating and heating, if we can go to an instant supply one. And we've put together some tentative options in a CIP plan, or if things, which unfortunately they seem to be breaking too often lately, if we got to replace it and you really got to bite the bullet, we might as well bite the bullet for the more efficient piece. And same thing goes in terms of the middle school. And just to remind everybody, and you're on the facility subcommittee and participated in that, is that we're probably a couple of weeks away of our kickoff meeting to work with Dora and Whittier to do our elementary school facilities analysis, so that we are positioned to effectively make those appropriate changes when that placeholder in the CIP shows up for that. And that's part of what we're doing. And I know there are a couple of options. You mentioned Exeter, and I know that the Eco Club or Enviro Club, and I think, isn't it, Jeff? They're working on a project not only for capturing some like a rain garden out here outside, but there was also mention of trying to put together a project to get some solar going. So we're going to try to hook them up with some of these consultants that call from time to time, in terms of perhaps the high school would be an ideal place to try to get a solar project going if we can leverage what fundraising the students can do versus some of this corporate leveraging that they use as their intro. So yeah, we are looking at that.
Sure. So maybe just to put a slight twist on it is to take all the what I would say the incremental goodness that you're doing every day, to sit there and say that light bulb is going to be replaced with a better light bulb, but to actually take it one step forward and actually link in. So whether we have a kilowatt challenge, so we're actually taking it out of the back office and bringing it to the front office, where we're actually engaging students. And then we're also taking some of those specific projects where you're saying, we're going to do an instant on tankless, or we're going to convert this one to this type of a program, that we're actually bringing that forward to show that and maybe it's an ability to showcase certain things that we're moving the district forward from an energy standpoint, because Chris Serlin doesn't necessarily see the goodness that we are doing every day, and maybe it's through some of those projects that become a little bit more publicized, or our ability to engage the student population in some kind of a challenge. So.
Steve, I just had a quick question about the electric. Maybe you can help us understand in the July and August time frames why those sums are almost identical. Are they averaging them, or are there things on inside the building that they, when you think about just the general running of the building, I can understand that, and they're probably in there cleaning, but it would seem to me that everything else maybe should be unplugged, and if the kids aren't there.
Well, even in the summertime, the building doesn't sleep, and we do have things going on. So
it's just it just struck me that I know we use less electricity when we don't have the classroom lights on and that kind of thing, and but we are doing cleaning in the summer. But it's also by section of the building or in certain areas and that kind of thing. And it just seemed like it was pretty equal to when the kids were actually in the building, and it was 100% usage. So I just had a question.
Here's a little further scrutiny, obviously. So I mean, that's as we get these analyses, that's the type of stuff that we go back and try to understand, because it fits in with what Tom was talking about in terms of what are you really doing, and why does it happen? And and I've talked in past meetings when we've had discussions about maintenance and everything else, how that when we first got the new high school, there was a big learning curve in terms of how to get the systems operating, and so we've tried to get them down. But even in that time of year, we've got summer school going on, and so it's not like the old days where at the last day of school, principal locked up the door, turned in the keys to the superintendent, went home for the summer. Our buildings are active more than just actually our maintenance activities. It's all kinds of sports going on. They're still using the facilities, and so. But we can go back and try to measure that and try to flesh that out for you. Sure.
This is a question for you, really. Didn't we have two buildings that had a special award for savings and energy? The high school was one, and I'm not sure what the other one was. Little Harbor, maybe? New Franklin? Yeah.
Yeah, we actually, thank you for reminding me of that, too. Kenny did send me an email. I can't remember much lately anymore, I guess, obviously. I can't remember all the good stuff you want to hear, but thank you. We actually did get a notification that the Energy Star Award had gone all the way through the process for the high school, and we will be receiving that award. The other building's still in the works, but we thought we had three, but we ended up with two. High school, and I believe New Franklin was the other one. And so, yeah, so that's a good effort. I mean, and that's an effort not only by the maintenance staff and Mr. Lynchy, but the kids as well as the teachers and the rest of the administration. It's a big group effort. And this being the newest building, it was easier to achieve, obviously. It's not that the intent and effort and sentiment is not there in the other schools. It's just that their infrastructure is that much older, so it's harder for them to achieve.
Yes, and one thing I neglected to share with you on the back side of this cohort sheet, and I just wanted to bring it to your attention, and that is, we did look administratively through the district, and so you have some cohort data around administrative staffing levels at the secondary school level, and so I think it's important that folks recognize that we really are appropriately staffed at the high school, and I wanted to bring that to your attention, and then share with you the minimum standards around when is a principal required, and each of our elementaries is below 500. We only have a principal at those buildings. The other piece, the only other adjustment then system-wide is the clerical support, where Mr. Bartlett had a business administrative assistant. She has left just prior to the holidays. And so knowing the budget and where we were, we're pretty much working an experiment here where Steve and I are sharing the services of Ms. Noble. So far, so good. Amy might want to check and report out on that in a confidential way. And so we're really trying to, and we'll see. I mean, one wonders, but so far it seems to be going well. And there's a lot going on in Steve's world with JBC and those kinds of duties, but I think we're doing well with that. The only other piece I wanted to share with you this evening, and it was in response to, I think, Ms. Chelman's question about defining the instructional core, and I think you heard a little bit about that this evening. So I provided you kind of an excerpt from the school approval minimum state standards. And I think it's important to I won't spend a lot of time. I would ask that you actually look at that section 306.26 and .27. And they go to great length to define exactly what minimally you need to offer in schools for approval. And it ranges from, and I'll just read, at the elementary school level, you have to have arts education, English language arts, and a reading program, a health education program, physical education program, information and communication technologies program, mathematics program, science education, social studies. And then it gets more detailed when you get to the middle school and high school. Then you pick up family and consumer sciences. You pick up technology education. And so when we talk about the core, we're talking about meeting these minimum standards. And I think that maybe there's a way to pass this out and make it look, but the minute you start tinkering with this, and I tried, you leave something out that's very important. And so I'm going to let the standards speak for themselves and ask that you look at that and come back But I do think folks need to understand exactly what public schools are required to do and provide children in terms of education. And that's it.
Is this published?
Oh, if you go on the
But-
DOE website.
Yeah, but aside, is this published in our district, or is this just, DOE? I'm just curious. Okay.
But there's a lot of latitude in here, too, in terms of how you offer what they suggest that you have.
I think that's true.
Right.
I think that's true.
Questions, comments?
I would just comment that we need to be careful that we don't get caught up in each person's idea about something that's not important or not worthwhile. I think back to my college days when there were things required that at the time I didn't think they were important, but that was the deal, and you did it. If you wanted to graduate and get a degree. Subsequently, you did discover, oh yes, there is a rhyme or reason to this. That was a very good idea. And as the mind matures, you realize that was important. So just because somebody thinks, well, that's kind of a far-out course, it's very important to someone else, and there's a reason for it in the package. So I've heard a number of people comment, well, this is a silly class. Why would you have that? Well, there's a reason.
Yeah, just to echo Ann, and this really does provide the definition of core, because if we don't provide this, then we lose our accreditation at the state level. Now, to Mitch's point, there are ways that you can meet these criteria, but you can't pick and choose what criteria you're going to meet and still be accredited. But I would ask us to think of putting a document together that points to the detail, but can summarize it in a fashion that allows people not to necessarily wade through 8 pages to see it. And so the cover sheet maybe includes something like to be accredited in the state of New Hampshire requires the district to meet established criteria set by the state that includes instruction and everything else around some major groups. I mean, frankly, and I should have known this, but if you look at this, what's striking to me at the high school level is we're obligated to offer intramural and interscholastic athletics. We're obligated to offer performing groups and academic clubs and societies. Those are part of the core curriculum as established by the state. And so I think as we've talked about protecting the core, everyone thinks differently, and that core, in fact, is a pretty still big space. It's connected to students, but I think it'll help us to really define this thing. So I think Carol actually was spot on in putting a definition together on this.
Leslie and then Kent.
To Ann's point as well, I would just want to be clear that I think one of the speakers tonight was talking about all the different things that we offer in our high school catalog. And what's that? Electives. All the electives, right. But those aren't offered every single quarter. So, you might have one that's only offered once in 2 years because that's how many kids are able to take that. So just because it's listed in the course catalog doesn't mean it happens every single term. So I don't want us to think that we're offering 85 different electives every single quarter. It just isn't possible. So you kind of have to group them together. So I just want people to understand that, it's not, we don't have all these extra electives all the time.
Following the discussion, is that one of the speakers tonight, and this is, it's just like the Swallows returning to Capistrano, always asks, why is it private schools and charter schools don't have this higher cost? It's roughly $5,000 to $6,000 cheaper per student. Well, I think this is your answer. Charter schools and private schools do not have to follow this. By the way, most of the private schools that end up with a child with disabilities and or learning disabilities. I can count cases that have come from St. Thomas to us because they can't. Also, charter schools do not pick up the disabled and heavily handicapped child that might go out of district, and we have had them as high as $32,000 per year on a student. So it doesn't take much to make that cost per student going up, and there is a blueprint that allows us to have our accreditation. And without getting your accreditation, you're not a public school. And again, it's the mandate. So I think we can answer at least one of those questions. I know it will return next year, but I really always say it's easily put to bed is that we have to take every child. We don't and cannot select children. When I began 18 years ago, charter schools were barely talked about. There were a few down south. And you look at the success rate of charter schools after 10 years, where are they? The majority of them close their doors.
Just one follow-on question or comment is that in the wake of some things that are void, that people are talking about, the fact that we don't offer foreign language at the elementary school and other programs that people are saying, hey, these are really hot-button items for us. I think the other piece to Dexter's point is that the Portsmouth standards have not necessarily changed. We still have a pretty high standard here, and though it might only take 20 credits to graduate from an accredited high school, it's 26. Is it 26? So we still require. The bar is still set higher here in the Portsmouth School District. So though the document might go through and say these are the key components that we are required and that we are meeting, we still have a bar that's set higher. And even though we still have things that we're missing. So, and I don't want it to be that we're making ourselves feel good, but it's just, level setting the discussion.
So I just have one. I'm sorry? So just, do you have anything else?
No, I'm good.
Okay, so just one wrapping up question, really. I'm looking at the total FTE count, so I want to be a little clear here. Right, so last year, this current year, we have 359 FTEs working for the school district. That's right?
That's what the chart says.
Okay, so we'll go with the chart. So I was looking at some numbers just before the meeting tonight. So not more than just a few years ago, that was at around 370 something. So now we're at 359. And so we're looking at, if we're talking about 12 and a half FTEs, so that other number here, 359.63, that's not adjusted. Right? So we're really looking at a potential FTE next year of about 346. Right? So we are going down. It's probably about 3% fewer FTEs next year than this year, and 3% FTEs this year than last year, something like that. So, I mean, we're making downward progress in that FTE count, and I know the City Council last year, when they were talking about a potential, 96% of the budget, one of the other considerations they were talking about was a 3 to 5% overall reduction. So I think we're meeting some of that kind of a target as well. So I just think people always talk about FTEs, and they want to, sort of get a clear sense of how many people work for the district. It is a lot. We're a pretty large school district, but I think we're doing well.
Last year you did that budget booklet. Are you going to be doing something similar to that?
As soon as you adopt a budget and I have clear numbers, we'll put a booklet together.
Well, again, I heard one of the speakers say it was really helpful.
Yeah, no, I fully intend to do that. It includes the cohort metrics as I work with you guys on.
Yeah, very well done.
Yeah. Yes, Ken, sorry.
Another question that tends to come up, or a discussion that comes up, maybe it's not the question, and I heard it at least 4 times tonight, and from both sides, is that, what have we reduced? And some are saying there's been no reduction. By the way, Ann and I were discussing there was 100 teachers during our RIF during the closing of Ps, and that was not, there was supportive staff above that was RIFed, and only 78 returned over about a 7-year period. So yeah, when somebody retired or something in that job and somebody was qualified, however the union presented that person to come back on. But I know, and like I pointed out, the first cut I ever made was to my German teacher, and she was so graceful by passing me with a C- that it killed me. And that was back in 1997. But I would like to get us a list of reduction of services that we've had over the last 10 years, and increases of services, because one of the increases came from the group that keeps, wants to make sure, and, I respect it, they want to make sure. We're now televised at every meeting. It doesn't come at negative dollars. It comes at some cost. So those that ask for something and then say reduce, they also have to know that, there's a cost to that. And again, I'm glad that we do the meetings, but there have been some services we have been able to introduce. But one of the largest cuts in the last 10 years was the deaf program. And that raised a lot of concern with people. But I know that if we took 10 years, we could at least counter the discussion that there haven't been cuts or reductions. There have been reductions at least every year for the last 10 years in some students' loss. So again, I think that
I just don't know if I have the archives to be able to.
I've got 12 years worth of budget, so
I can give you,
right, a generalization. I think we can have some generalization. And again, what we can, and if we have to, we can add on to that. And again, there has been some increases in certain programs. In the last 12 years, we put lacrosse in. There have been student services we put on. But when I hear that we haven't had reductions, we have definitely. Last year there was reductions. The year before that there were heavy reductions. So, and final question is, this appetite of coming in at 0% seems to be there. If we're at this year, and I hate doing one-year budgets, and I'm not asking for it tonight, but if we're doing this drastic, and with an election coming up for those city councilors, and people are happy with a 0% type budget, I don't think it's going to go away next year. And if we're doing this year, guess what? And I'm a black and white person. There is no way we can be zero or even close to zero next year, because we will have those cost of living. Somewhere that comes in, and that next cut could be. I don't believe it. I don't believe it would be possible to a 0% in a year from now. Thank you.
Any other comments before we adjourn and go home? Okay. So when are we meeting next? We're meeting every Tuesday and Thursday. So next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday,
is
we're
at
at
New Franklin,
which is your regularly scheduled workshop meeting. And so as part of that, you're going to have a presentation on technology from Principal Shea in his building.
Okay.
Bob Sullivan and Kathleen Dwyer will be there. We're going to have a workshop session on the facilities use policy, which Bob's going to come in his own style, which is wonderful, and educate you about what the issues are and how to craft a policy that meets your will. And then we will do some budget workshop. We're going to talk particularly about the adjustment of counselors at the elementary school as well as at the high school. And then we meet the following Thursday. One thing I do want to say, in light of the weather and whether or not we get into the office, you may not get a packet delivered to you tomorrow. So we will deliver something electronically on Monday morning to you.
Cut your break.
Thank you. All right. Just so you know, I just want folks to know. Where's my packet?
School now?
Well,
and that's not the first thing I look at. So you got some. From my perspective, you have. I know that. I hate to fess up, but
I'm
you
looking.
some flexibility from my perspective.
Right. I'm looking forward to your voice at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's an automatic phone. It's a robocall. So I can talk back to it. Okay, we all done?
I figured I hung up too soon. You never did listen to the whole message. I'm calling back.
Yeah, he did call twice last time. Okay. Well, thank you for coming tonight.
Thanks, guys.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Right. All in favor?